Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Joining me today to share the 10 books that had a major impact on her life and work is Wisdom Walker, Medicine Woman, Dream Whisperer, Shamanic Elder, teacher and author Davina MacKail, who inspires miracles of positive transformation in people's lives from the application of Feng Shui and shamanic principles. Davina MacKail, welcome.
Thank you, Sandie. It's been a pleasure to hear. I'm really looking forward to this.
Me too. So you have a very long history with books because you've been reading since before you went to school.
Yeah, that is the absolute gift my mother gave me. There wasn't many, but that one I can give her full praise for. I'm so grateful for that. I mean, we were forced to learn. I mean, she was a real believer in education, mainly because she had me so young. She never got an education. So it was her kind of way. So she insisted we learned to read barely as soon as our eyes were open. And I grew up in extreme poverty. We didn't have books. It wasn't that she could go out and buy them, that she'd go to jumble sales. There was always books in the house. We always went to the library. We always had all of the books that we could ever get out on a library ticket fully. And it was really in that almost Victorian era. We had to wash our hands. We weren't allowed, always had to have clean hands and sit at the table, and you were never allowed to bend the corners over or anything like that. I have to say I've rebelled against that, and I treat books appallingly on that level. I do bend the corners over and I make notes in them and I highlight them and all sorts. I can never get rid of them. Unfortunately, they're very much mine.
Some would say that's treating books lovingly because it's really engaging with the books.
Definitely.
So how easy or challenging was it to pick just 10?
It was actually incredibly difficult because, I have got my seminal highlights that are all in that list, but every time I thought of one, I'd think, oh yeah, but there was that one, and then there was that one, and then it kind of one led to another. And it was, to whittle that list down to this is the definitive list was extremely difficult. There could have been many more contenders on that list, put it that way.
Everybody says that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's start with the first book on your list, and it is The Call of the Wild by Jack London, published in 1903, which you say you read when you were quite young.
I did read it. I don't even know if it was, that was one thing, again, because my mum just had random books from wherever she could get them. I think I read probably a lot of age inappropriate material at quite a young age because it was just anything that I could escape into. But I don't know how. It's a children's book as far as I remember. All I know is that I read it repetitively. I'm pretty much a one book woman. There's very rare that I read a book twice, because there's just so many delicious books to read. Why go over one a second time is my kind of feeling on that. But with that one, I remember reading it again and again, and I would sob. It was a very, very emotional breakthrough for me. And it's interesting, and it was only really hindsight from doing this for your program, Sandie, that I really reflected on what that was about and why that story touched me so much. I still have Alaska on my bucket list, and funnily enough, I actually found some old members of my family in recent years, and actually I have a stepdaughter or a half sister that lives in Alaska, so I might get to do that bucket list. And huskies, I can't walk past a husky without my heart going, oh, I want one. I really still in love with huskies, still in love with Alaska from that book. But the big thing that I got from the hindsight from you was, gosh, it was coming from a trauma response. I had the ubiquitous unhappy childhood that I think most of us on the planet have suffered in one form or another. And that was my kind of escape. So Buck was the main heroic dog, the dog that was the outsider, the sort of domesticated dog that went into the sort of realm of the huskies, where there was very much this alpha pack kind of scenario, and he had to like work his way up, and he was really sort of treated quite badly in the first place. And so I think it gave me, it's a book that I can realize, like, I was the underdog just as a child, being powerless in that situation. And it gave me that sense that I would one day escape. I would one day get out of this, that somehow in the future. So it kept me going. And I know I related to Buck. I kind of wanted him sort of, I was in love with this dog as my child self.
Number 2. Wow, it was interesting to see this on your list. I'm not sure anybody has chosen this book, but it's one of my old favourites. Linda Goodman's Sun Signs.
Yeah.
And that was published in 1968. And I think that's about pretty much around the time I bought the book. It was, everybody was looking at that book back in the late 60s.
Thank God for her. She spawned a whole generation of astrologers. Because she was, for me, I mean, I just, again, happened to be on Mum's bookshelf, and I loved it because I definitely, in my life, I noticed that I like systems or maps. I like astrology, numerology, and a lot of the things that I've learned and studied have these kind of numerical systems in it, and I'm attracted to that. And I love this idea of the profiling. Now, the map's not the territory, but you'll meet, every Aries is different, every Taurus is different, but there is so much brilliant information in astrology, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of giving us an idea of our nature, and we can work against our nature, or we can work with our nature. And I mean, I'm still an astrologer 50 years later. I've trained extensively in astrology, so that's how influential that book was. I mean, it didn't stop. I mean, that was the beginning of a very long lifetime journey for me. But what was wonderful is it made sense of myself. I read about myself first in there, and it was just like, oh my God, yeah, that's me. Yeah, I'm exactly like that. Those are all my characters. And, and then you read about your friends and you go, yes, I see that in them. And there's got to be, there's something in it. I ended up having a syndicated astrology column for over 200 local newspapers and all sorts, and still bring it into my work today. She was brilliant. Good old Linda. Thanks.
What sign are you?
Sorry?
What sign are you?
I'm Aries.
You're an Aries. Okay. Yeah. Did you read Sun Signs for Lovers?
I didn't like any of her other books.
You didn't?
It's really interesting. And funnily enough, I find this with a lot of the authors, and some of the ones, I don't know. I don't know if that's just that sort of phenomena. Almost the first book is the one that's really coming from the soul, or from that real essence of what you've done. And then sometimes, I mean, having been sort of being published myself, there is that sense of, right, what else have you got in you? And I don't know if they're always primed for the second and third one in quite the same way. So yes, it was great, but I didn't think it was as good. I didn't like her. She did one on moon signs, I think, as well, which I didn't like that either. But no, the Sun Signs is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I'd still recommend it. I still think if you never really got into astrology and you're quite interested, it's still a great book.
Yeah, it is. So number 3 is A Guide to the I Ching by Carol K. Anthony, and that was published in 1988.
Now, the I Ching for me is, it's the oldest oracle in the world. It's the Chinese oracle. It's the I Ching is the book of changes. And really, that for me sets out how energy works. So the 64 hexagrams that this oracle is made up of is basically the interpretation of how energy moves from extreme yin, the receptive energy, the sort of most passive energy, to the extreme yang, the most active, energized energy, if you like, and all the mutations in between that. And so, I mean, I have I think I said to you, I've got 15 copies of the I Ching, because of course everybody's interpretation is different, and these ancient texts are pretty dense, and then you've got language translation on top of that. And so you can read a copy of the I Ching and think, well, I'm no clearer now. I mean, that might be an oracle, but I'm still in the mystery. I have no idea what I was supposed to get from that. And Carol Anthony's version was possibly one of the first that managed to find a very personal, every woman's sort of interpretation, and gave those top notes in a way that was applicable to one's life. And because it's a very deep oracle. What I love about, I mean, we have so many oracle cards and tarot cards and all of these sort of different decks. Everyone's got a deck out these days, but some of them for me are quite sort of superficial and light. I mean, the and also gives very positive messages, which are great. The I Ching doesn't pull any punches. Like, I go to the I Ching when I really want to know, when I'm I'm like, okay, I'm blindsiding myself. I don't, I'm a bit like the child, fingers in the ears, like, no, don't want to listen. And then I'll go to the I Ching and I'll go, yeah, all right, yeah, I know that's the answer. And it's tougher. It is a tougher situation that really allows us to work with our denser shadow selves. But it's how life works. It works with our DNA in the body. There's lots of correlations. It also reminds me, I think it's kind of, in a sense, the yin yang, that on off masculine feminine duality is also in a sense where computing came from. In that, the I Ching has, it's a deep, deep wisdom that it holds.
So the I Ching and astrology, I mean, do you study human design, which incorporate both of those?
I do, but I prefer gene keys. I personally, and Richard Rudd's Gene Keys is a synthesis and it came from human design. So I love human design for certain things. It's really good for some top notes. But in terms of working with the shadow self, I think Gene Keys is infinitely superior. It's much more of a yin, reflective, contemplative process. It really makes you look at your own stuff. I think the gate system and all the different gates that are, I just think you might as well read an astrology wheel. It's much clearer for me, much clearer to look at that than a human design chart in many ways.
Yeah. Book number 4, Creating Sacred Space with Feng Shui. Learn the art of space clearing and bring new energy into your life. Karen Kingston. I had that book too back in the day, and that one was published in 1996.
This one really did change my life very dramatically. Not the greatest book on the planet in that sense, but was genuinely life-changing. My best friend bought it for my birthday when it was published, and it kind of coincided with that big zeitgeist of Feng Shui movement that happened in the 90s. All the red top tabloids had, put your Lucy down, stick your frog in the corner, the wealth corner. I mean, it was very big at the time through the 90s. It was when it really came as a movement. And I was working in Meanwood Road in Leeds. I mean, I literally had a panic button from my desk to the police station. It was rough. And then some. It was not a pleasant place to be. And I was manager of a premium rate chat room at the time. So many things in my life, but that was where I was in that moment. And it was just really kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, like, not, but sort of just keeping everyone kind of, alive and happy, basically. And my friend, I read that book and it made sense of so much that I intrinsically felt and understood, because we, home is metaphor of the self, as William Morris said, and it's so true. Everything. I mean, now I've spent years and thousands of training in Feng Shui through all sorts of different organizations. And I love the story of home. You really can walk into somebody's space, somebody's home, and see everything that's going on with them in the way they've placed their furniture, the symbolism of their artwork, what pictures they've put on the wall, the colors they've used, how they've placed their furniture. I mean, it's fascinating that, the psychology of environment, if you like.
Yeah.
And she really woke me up to that one. And basically, because of that book, I left. I mean, I'd been in a corporate career up until that point. I ended up training as a Feng Shui consultant, and I still do that work again today, and completely shifted away. It just woke everything up. I mean, I was obsessed when that book, that book did start a serious obsession. I mean, and again, these things often come from childhood. My mother is, and I think it's post-war generation, happens a lot. because people don't feel safe, that she's a hoarder, as a lot of that generation is. You know, think about like when we were at school, we were taught to collect things, weren't we? You had to have hobbies and you were collecting cards, or you're always collecting something, i.e. hoarding a load of junk that we don't need. So, you know, it was way before the sort of Marie Kondo, who really rode off the back of that initial wave of the real work and then came in with something that was just seemingly much simpler, and everybody really got on the program with that. But Karen Kingston was the first and was definitely the best at the time, without any shadow of a doubt. She really understood that. I ended up training with her for some of that time as well.
Book number 5, Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge and the Teachings of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer, published in 2013.
This is a book I think everybody should read just because of her writing. She's a deeply poetic woman, and she's also a botanist and a scientist. So, but she also comes from,
Excuse me,
you know, an indigenous kind of, so she bridges both worlds. So she comes from that very indigenous cultural tradition of how we relate to Mother Earth and the elements.
Excuse me.
Yes. And then she also bridges that, you know, crossover to the science and the data of what we're doing. But the two things, well, there's a couple of things in her book, apart from just, I mean, it's just delicious to read. It's a lovely poetic romp through the world. But she talks about the honorable harvest, which I really love. And I teach her wisdom in my shamanic courses, because her honorable harvest is never take more than you need. You know, always leave some, never take the last plant. You know, all these just very basic things of like the sacred reciprocity. And she also talks about how the earth gives us all of the energy that we need freely. We have wind power, we have solar power, we have geothermal underwater power, and we have hydropower. But we don't look to those. I mean, we are beginning to, of course, but we've only done, you know, the extractive raping of the earth for the fossil fuels, where we've cut into basically our mother from what you would see as an indigenous. And again, with it, she tells a wonderful story in there that she had been talking to some old boy hunters, and they were all like gathered, you know, around their pints at the end of the day, discussing whether they'd managed to shoot, hunt, fish, whatever, their great game things. And, you know, the young lads were going, yeah, I got 3 and I got 4. Anyway, there was one old boy there, and it finally kind of came to his turn. He said, well, I went out and I took 1 bullet and I waited all day. And, you know, earlier in the day, a mother had come through with her young, and I'm like, no, young mum looking after the deer. And he said, towards the end of the day, I was just about to go home, and a young buck came into the clearing and literally turned, looked me straight in the eye, and then showed his flank to me. And that was my bullet. And it was just such a profound relationship between one and one's prey, but also that it wasn't then prey, because it's like that animal understood and had sacrificed in right reciprocity. And just these things that she talks about, I mean, if all of us really, really paid attention to where, you know, we're indoctrinated into greed, and consumerism is so out of control. We always want more, more, more. And it's like, do you really need it? And she really teaches that, to really consider, do you really need that? What have you left behind for others? Is that sustainable? Can it regrow? Is that an honorable harvest, basically?
Yeah. Her book has been mentioned a few times on people's lists, and I haven't read it yet, but it's on my ever-growing list.
Yes, I know. Mine's growing long too.
Yeah, never get through it. So, book number 6. This is one that, yes, I've read and interviewed the author. Dispelling Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil by Paul Levy, published in 2011. And it really does give us a good reflection of what's going on in the world today.
It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. But interesting enough, he's another author. I can't read his other books. I've tried. I've got them all, because the ones that tell you how to, you know, work with it and how to get over it. But again, I think he's taken what is a deceptively simple idea. And this is where it's like, if you think you get it, you haven't got it. right? And that, I mean, and he's a Buddhist by sort of tradition, and it's a deep exposition. So Wetiko, I mean, people say Wetiko, Wetiko, there's different ways of pronouncing it. It's basically, it's an indigenous name for evil. And so what he sees evil as this mind virus, is egophrenia would be another way of describing it. And that we all have that to a degree, because we all have an ego, and particularly in Western world, we're taught to develop our ego. And it's where that ego gets out of control. And obviously with our people in corporations and global leaders and various other things where the level of that Wetiko gets more extreme, we can see how it plays out in our society in all sorts of different ways. So seemingly deceptively simple, but catching that Wetiko in each of us is a much more profound journey. And that's something that, again, use in shamanic teaching. And it's like, I use that book as a seminal text that I recommend to all my students, because it is the best description. But I think the first one, you can see, what I find extraordinary about that book is you can feel his deep struggle to get clarity on what he understands so deeply, but is very hard to articulate. It's like all these true spiritual teachings, they're beyond words. So, but all we have to describe them are words, and it makes it complex. And I think he's done a phenomenal job. But again, I haven't got into the second and third, and I think he might even have a fourth now, but as well. That first book, I think, is the best.
One of the things you said in your written description is that you've always been curious about the spelling of our language, and evil is live and backwards, and devil is lived reversed. And, I've had exactly the same thoughts. What is it about that? Because if you look at lexigramming, I don't know if you know lexigramming, but it's a form of like making anagrams out of people's names. And they become, you actually see some prophetic information there. But, these words all have such deeper aspects to them.
Well, and it's a very interesting one with the live, like live or live backwards, and the devil is lived. Certainly because I work with the tarot, and the hero's journey in the tarot is a set of 22 archetypes of the hero's journey that someone might go through in life. And the devil, of course, is the shadow self, if you like. But it's like, where that shadow self comes from is from the gestalt of how we have made something mean. So if something happens to us very, very young and we make it mean, because humans are always trying to make meaning. So we go, oh, that means I'm not good enough, or that means I don't belong, or that means I've been abandoned, or that means X, Y, Z. So we make these things. And then, of course, anything that we then, always get our referential sort of program, so we can give ourselves a pat on the back and go, oh, yeah, you were right about that. Look at that. Oh, yeah. So whatever we believe, we'll always get the confirmation bias. And then that starts to link a chain. So it creates a gestalt. And then, of course, that becomes the devil, because the devil in the tarot is about the chains that bind us, that keep us stuck. And of course, when we have a belief that is ultimately erroneous, but we've made it true through our belief system, then it keeps us trapped. It keeps us in a dark place, if it's not a helpful belief. And that's where I think Wetiko is very, very powerful, because, as I say, it's this mind virus, and it's like any virus, isn't it? It's if we don't get to the root of that, if we can't unlock it at its root cause, it doesn't disappear. And we have to get in under those belief systems and really question ourselves. Why do I believe that? Is that really true? I love the Byron Katie. I mean, that's another one that could have made the list. But her 4 statements are great. Is it true? Is it really true? When is it not true? Who would you be without that belief? I mean, that's such a good checking procedure. Simple, works.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to take a short break now. So you're watching a No BS Spiritual Book Club interview, and my guest today is wisdom walker, medicine woman, dream whisperer, shamanic elder, teacher, and author Davina MacKail. We'll be back with more of Davina's list after this break.
Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting Om Times Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit sedgbeer.com. Click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene keys is basically the code book of life. In the gene keys, the book is made up of these three levels: shadows, gifts, and siddhis. And the journey is through those three levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the siddhi. And the siddhis are very exalted words. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back, Davina MacKail, book number 7, Time to Think, Listening to Ignite the Human Mind by Nancy Kline, published in 2002.
And just for anyone listening, that's Kline, Kline, not the other more famous Kline, because of no logo fame. I think that's because it's not as well known. This, again, was a deep wake-up call. So her premise, I mean, she's written a lot of books on it, but her premise is basically very, very simple. It is to give uninterrupted attention to somebody to think about something. And of course, we are in our extreme world of distraction these days, where everything is interrupted and interruptible. You know, we just interrupt all the time. There's always a ping, a notification. I mean, I have to say I'm quite old school, so I turn everything off, and then nobody can ever get me. And most of the time, my phone's on silent. But it's just like, that's the way I prefer to. I mean, I'm not used to it. I came when you could be out all day and nobody could contact you unless it, you know, it was a voice message on your answering machine. I kind of miss those days, I have to say. Now it's because it's really interesting. Client is like, because they can get you via so many different platforms and so many different forms. And if you don't respond on one, you'll suddenly find 3 messages on every other. And I'm like, hang on, I'm just human, just trying to catch up, just trying to get back to you. But her book is, it's that if nobody is ever given a chance to complete their thinking process or to complete a thought, what do we lose in terms of the innovation on the planet and the creative genius that is possible? And it's really fascinating. And I've been really, really looking at that, and also becoming much more aware of how it happens all the time. And it's really helped me with my business partner, actually, because we massively interrupt each other all of the time. And it's a fascinating concept, because often in the, like, as each, you know, we know each other very well, we've known each other for years, and so part of it is you get excited about an idea, and so there is something of like the brainstorming, of the popcorn effect of everybody's ideas coming in, and oh yeah and that. But without that deep listening, a lot of ideas get lost, or they don't get fully formed, or they just don't get finished. They just get, and because by the time you've got the sort of forum back, you've forgotten what you were saying. You don't know where that thought was going. So she has devised this process to basically allow very in-depth, aware, deep dive thinking, and to allow space. And so I've worked with this, and now we have time thinking sessions. So it's like, right, 5 minutes, go. And I have to sit on my hands and zip my lips and not speak. It's very difficult sometimes, but oh my God, that has really helped us hear each other in a different way. So I think it's a brilliant, brilliant concept. And I think if it came into all meetings and business environments and places where we need, you know, because let's face it, Sandie, I mean, you know this as well, as why you're doing things like you're doing, is we need new ideologies, we need new stories, we need new creative innovation. And when we're constantly, I think the human soul is, every human soul is a creative genius. I truly believe that. We are infinitely creative beings. We can constantly come up with solutions. We're fantastic. We're designed to find a solution because we're constantly in that evolutionary process, which is always finding the next answer. But if you're constantly shutting it down, stopping it, closing it, cutting it, you know, distracting from it, then how does that ever get developed into that much deeper way of giving space to go, what do you think about what?
Yeah, I've never heard of this, but I think it's amazing. And apparently she started it in 1984, and it's now a global company with offices all over the world, and consultation clients like Time Warner, Shell, the BBC, the NHS. Yeah, they need a lot of time to think, the NHS does, and the BBC right now. But you know, you're absolutely right, because you know, I know people where they ask you a question and you start to think and answer them, and then they start interrupting you, and it's like, I've forgotten, you know, there was something I was going to say and now it's gone forever.
Yeah.
You know, we need this, and our kids need it, because the world that they live in, they do not have any time for contemplation, none at all.
And that's really interesting, because you know, I mean, I just walk down the street now and I notice everyone is face down. You know, everyone's got their phone in their hand. Well, I mean, I say everyone, but the majority of people, if you actually watch like a train station or just any public space, if you actually look around, everyone is fully engaged, but not with each other and not with that awareness of anything around. And you're absolutely right about young people. I mean, my goodness, to put them in a thinking environment, what difference that would make to the innovation that we could access. I mean, it would be remarkable. I mean, to think of it, because we don't even have it in school. And I mean, personally, I think the school system's extremely outdated generally. I mean, our world has exponentially grown well beyond our current education system, which isn't fit for purpose in that sense. And we don't bring these in, you know, we don't encourage creativity. We don't encourage innovation. We don't encourage, it's like, you know, who are you and what do you think? It's like, no, I'm going to tell you what to think.
Yeah, we don't give them the opportunity to think. We don't ask the questions, you know, which a lot of them think, well, I wouldn't know what the answer is. But if you ask the right question and give them time, they could come up with something.
Yes, and she talks, that's her kind of trademark signature. She has a process through this. So, but the most important aspect of that book is something simple that we could all do without needing to know the incisive questions and all the more complex stuff she gets into for companies, is simply what you just said, Sandie. It's when somebody starts to speak, to just give them your direct attention. And the thing that she found was companies found it really difficult to begin with. She came up across a lot of pushback, and they were like, no, I'm not taking my phone to the meeting. No, I'm not doing this. No, what do you mean I can't, engage in the internet while I'm also listening to you, et cetera, et cetera. And yet when she really pushed and said, and she lost quite a lot of clients in the beginning because she was quite boundaried on her rules of engagement, and they couldn't fulfill that. But then when the ones that did were just blown away by the results of stuff that came up that none of them would have been able to think about without giving the space for that.
Yeah. So book number 8, Secrets of the Talking Jaguar, Memoirs from the Living Heart of a Mayan Village by Martin Prechtel, published in 1998.
Have you read any of his books?
I have not.
Oh, again, it's a little bit, I realize I have two, I was just, as I'm talking to you, I'm realizing I've kind of got 2 levels to this. So one level fulfills my poetic heart that just loves people that use language in innovative, creative, delicious ways that just like, you just get lost in the words and the way they put them together. And the other one is because I'm learning something. And Martin Prechtel I did learn things from, but he's just, he's another one of the, like Robin Chimera, he's a poetic writer. His shamanic stories are extreme. They're deep, they're profound, and they're fascinating. But the big thing, he unlocked a key for me, because I've worked with the Peruvian kind of Kero shamans since around, I started my Peruvian shamanic training in the mid-90s, but I didn't actually go to Peru till 2000. And the thing with him, or what I noticed, and I did what's called the Kuluriti pilgrimage. Now, the Kuluriti pilgrimage is a bit like Woodstock for Peruvians, I think, I don't know, or South Americans. So we're all going up, really up into the high Andes at very, very high altitude. Everybody and everything that you're going to last for a weekend goes up a very narrow pathway, about 1 meter. And when I talk about everything, I'm talking about full brass bands, everyone playing a different anthem. Of course, all the instruments, because their brass go out because of the freezing cold and the altitude. And so it's all out of tune. And it's kind of insanity, right? There's horses, mules, humans, everything going up and staying on the mountain and all the rest of it. And what happens is, I went with my kind of shamanic, I mean, they've subsequently become my shamanic family. I'm like godmother to half the children and things like that. But that was kind of my first meeting. And the entire village, one family takes responsibility for paying for the entire village to get to Kuluriti, which costs a huge amount. So they go into debt for it. And I kind of never really got this. And I'm like, that's a bit crazy. If they shared it amongst each other, surely that would be a better distributed system. But Martin Prechtel describes this brilliantly in one of his stories, that he had an elder in the community, and he was kind of ostracized and was very much an outsider, and was subject to a lot of ridicule and what might be called brujo, or, sort of unhelpful magic, shall we say, against him. And he kind of helped out his mentor and teacher, and actually kind of borrowed some money to help get out of the situation, the advice. And he was desperate from a Western perspective to pay that money back, like we would. We don't like to be never a lender or a borrower be. That was my mom drummed that one into my brain. And we don't like that kind of sense of owing somebody. But of course, in South America, they live with a very different culture, and they want you owing them. And so his teacher, or his elder that had helped him out, was so angry and wouldn't speak to him when he paid his debt off. And Martin just couldn't understand it. He's like, what have I done wrong? I thought he'd be so happy. I've done the honorable thing. I've given the money back. But of course, the elder was like angry, because he's like, well, now I can't ask you for help, because there's no debt between us. So they see it from almost a totally different perspective. It's not because they want you own, but then it's like, if the potatoes need picking or the roof needs putting on, they can't ask their neighbor for help if there isn't the burden of debt. But the burden of debt gives permission for the community to work. And it's a fascinating, so they work as a positive thing to help communities foster togetherness and collaboration, which is a fascinating different perspective just from a different cultural idea. But his stories generally of his shamanic adventures are fabulous. All his books are delicious.
I like the way you described it as a bond of debt. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, well, isn't it interesting how different cultures? Yeah. Okay, number 9. The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World by Ian Gilchrist, 2019.
Have you read this one?
No.
No, this again, I mean, he's just brought out another one, which is actually in 2 volumes, kind of like several inches thick. And again, I'm going to do that thing of like, oh no, the first one was the one. Now I've got these 2 volumes that I might get through this lifetime and I might not. I've got more discerning with age. I don't always read. Before, if I started a book, I'd have to finish it. Now I don't. I'm not the same. Now I'm like, no, I'll put this one down. It's a little bit. I remember that. I think I was talking to you with Women That Run with the Wolves, the most owned book and least read book on the planet. But listen to her audio, and you'll change your mind because she's delicious on the audio. But back to this one is really it's. What it is like I got off on Women of the World, so I've forgotten where I was going with that. Just remind me and come back to it because there was a point there that I really wanted to make.
You're talking about the development of the Western mind and the relationship.
Yeah. So his big allegory is that in the Western development, we basically gave all of our power to science and rationality, and that left very incisive brain. So his allegory is that there's the master, and the master's sitting on the mountaintop, and the master is giving his transmission to the students, but the emissary is the one that goes down to the villages and finds all these students. So over time, the emissaries, for years, he's gone down, done all the hard work, pushed all the students up the hill to the master, and the master just sat there and does the transmission. So after a few years of this, he gets a bit fed up and he's going, well, I've heard these teachings 100 times. I'm as good as the master, aren't I? I must be as good. I know it all backwards. I could recite it that. So of course he abandoned the master and just started going out and giving the teachings himself. But of course he wasn't the master. He was the emissary. And so the teachings weren't in the same way because it wasn't the transition. So how I see this division is between the heart and the ego. So the heart, if we look at it is like the unconscious, if you like. So it's the bit of us that takes in all the wisdom of all the billions of biological bits of data that we are mostly unaware of each and every day. But that's what really informs our deeper wisdom. But it doesn't have free will. It doesn't have choice. The ego mind has free will and choice. It's the one that makes the decision. It's the one that decides to do something. But mostly it's quite uninformed. It doesn't actually hold too much conscious information at any one time, but it's been informed by this deeper thing. So if we really give mastery back to the heart. So for me, the ego makes a fantastic servant, i.e. emissary, but it makes a dreadful master. And so it's like really giving, that's what I got from that. I sometimes get things that are perhaps not what the author naturally intended when they wrote the book, but of how I interpreted that. But that I think it's a brilliant, brilliant story of how that all developed and how we really gave power away to the emissary and forgot about the master. And I feel, and this is like obviously a lot of the indigenous cultures right now, in fact all the prophecies, they may have different stories, but they're all basically talking about the convergence of this time and this sort of and that for me is the true evolution, that we need to come from the heart wisdom and really start listening to our individual hearts and stop letting the frightened, scared little Wetiko'd ego take over the running of the show, basically.
So book 10, Pussy, A Reclamation by Regina Tomashow. Not heard of this one before. Not entirely sure how to pronounce it. Tomashaw, something like that. 2016. And you say you love this book. for?
It's general female badassery. But I mean, I'm not sure of, I thought, oh, this is a spiritual book club. Would I call this a spiritual book? I did question myself.
Well, it's inspirational.
Inspirational, definitely. But again, what I got, I mean, she basically, it's all about women and pleasure and about the disconnection of women from their pleasure. So she's very much about that aspect. That's not so much the life-changing idea that I got from the book, which kind of came from what she talks about courtesans. And I'm going to come back to the courtesans in a moment. But basically, we have our 7 chakras. And the base chakra is what connects us to our sense of survival, our ability for our life force, our energy, our power, and tunes us in to the rooted sense of security and safety on the planet. Now, what really came to mind is like, wow, look how programmed women have been to disconnect from their base chakra. It's the C word is the worst swear word. It's called our monthly menstrual cycle is called a curse. We're taught shame about it. We're taught to hide it. It's not something, obviously things are changing, but certainly in those older generations, most young women had nothing to do with it. I mean, I don't know about you, but my mother certainly didn't tell me much about menopause. That was a big wake up call and a shock when I got there. I was like, what the heck? And yes, you have a lot more information, but you kind of want it from those elders. So she woke me up to and I think this is, the disconnection of that women have been almost systemically disconnected from that base chakra. And that's what gives us our sense of survival and foundation and rootedness. And so women need to really connect their base chakra to earth themselves and to be able to have equitable rights. Because if you haven't got that same grounding and the same foundation as the male, then there's always going to be inequality. And it's nothing to do with whether we're the weaker sex or any of these kind of things. And what she spoke about, which I think is fascinating, is the courtesans. So in the whole idea, and of course the courtesans were fully connected to their base chakra. They were the ones giving pleasure to the men. But interestingly enough, they were not the Victorian housewives that basically were chattels and owned by their husbands and had nothing, right? They were wealthy. They were rich. The men provided houses for them, jewels for them, and they had their total independence and had a pretty good life, basically, and had an awful lot of political power too.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it was a big, it was just something I hadn't really gone into and considered particularly. And I'm like, actually, this is a whole phenomena. There is something here where this is systemic and we've just not really looked at this in a deeper way. And it could be something that is relatively simple that would really make a difference for women's equitable financial regulation on the planet and just their ability to provide for themselves. That's what I got from it. And I mean, and of course, she's great at waking up. She's fun. She's fully in her badassery in terms of what and then my God, she really went against the grain to bring that book out and to do the work that she's done. I mean, she, it's not a comfortable place to be. It's not a comfortable school to have set up. And she's done amazingly well in bringing that message to a lot of women.
Well, that's your 10 best list. Now we've got a few minutes we can talk about you. You recently returned to the UK after 2 years caretaking 47 hectares of rainforest in the Peruvian Amazon. Tell us about that.
It was tough. And what I discovered, Sandie, is I'm just too old, white and female and English, really, to survive long in the Amazon. I mean, people get this very romanticized idea, I think, about the Amazon, but the reality is you're 2 millimeters away from death most days in some form or another. Either something poisonous is going to bite you, get in your bed inside, or the 90-foot tree is going to land on your head, or your boat's capsized, or you lost the boat, or blah blah blah. I mean, we were 3.5 hours. I got a very clear vision that I was meant to go there. This piece of land had actually been owned by my first shamanic teacher from around 30 years ago. So there was weird synchronicities so it's a long journey. And we'd been and run retreats there for a couple of years. And on the second retreat, I really got this strong calling, like, this is only going to work if you actually come and live here. You know, it's quite difficult to try and run or caretake 47 hectares with, you know, remote managers from a country thousands of miles away. So I really did take the Jaguar leap. I sold up everything and fully intended to never come back and live in the UK. People plan and God laughs, as they say. And so made this leap, and we had one amazing retreat, and then the pandemic doors very firmly closed behind us. I didn't even come out the jungle. I mean, literally, I have no idea really what happened during the pandemic, because for 4.5 months, I was in the middle of the Amazon with no internet, no water. I mean, we obviously got water, but literally every piece of water we drank had to come up the river. Didn't go into town, with a bunch of kind of randoms thinking, what on earth have I just done? But there's also some, because it's not like, even, you know, it's so defensive. I mean, if you stay still long enough in the Amazon, you just basically become food. And even the trees are defensive. So you can't, like, you know, I'm a bit of a tree hugger. You know, I like sitting in nature, a bit of forest bathing, all delightful. You can't do that in the Amazon. You have to keep moving, because even the trees have massive defensive spikes against them, or there's a bullet ant, you know, so if you lean against it, you're going to really wish you hadn't. So everything's kind of wanting to eat you. It's very, very intense, but it also gets in under your skin. And God, I'll never regret that. I mean, it was tough and difficult, and, you know, I've had to have things cut out of me that were growing and, you know, living inside me that get in, and all sorts of things, delightful things like that. But it definitely rewilded me. It really connected me to that deeper, and you understand why your ancestors learned to pray. Because a lot of the time in the Amazon, you feel about as relevant as an ant. Small ant. And that's like, even getting to know that, the first time I can remember, the army ants came in. So I was cooking lunch, and I was preparing lunch, and I suddenly thought, oh, there's an ant, brushed it off the surface, and I was just like, oh, there's more ants, right? And like within seconds, the entire kitchen, I mean, they are literally armies with battalions. So I kind of ran out the building, like, what the hell's happened? And there were ants everywhere. Now, what I learned is that, I mean, but I just kind of panicked and sort of ran around like, oh my God, what's happening? But what they do, if you move away from the buildings, after about an hour, they've moved through, and they do a fantastic job of housekeeping for you. They eat all the dead insects. They eat all that. They clean the place up. It's immaculate. I couldn't serve the lunch, obviously, so it's full of dead floating ants. But apart from that, they're fantastic. But when it happens, everything's so big and supersized. You know, snails are the size of your fist, right? This is that. It's just like, and you know, you can't just go and do a bit of gardening without something that's gonna, as I say, eat you coming out, or poison you, or snarl at you. I mean, we are very blessed in the UK. We don't really, you know, don't have any, but it has left me. It's funny, I'm doing a gardening project up in Wales at the moment, and I do have a little bit of PTSD from it, because I'm noticing, I was down in this Japanese garden, and I was like very, very slightly nervous, like, oh, Davina, you're not in the Amazon. It's okay. Nothing is going to come out of there that's going to hurt you. It's all right.
Yeah, we don't have many predators.
No, but I've kind of got
human ones.
I say the most amazing thing that happened is due to the pandemic. This is the one gift from the pandemic, because we lived on quite a big, wide Amazonian river that used to change. I mean, terrifying change of meter, like 10 to 15 meters in height, like sometimes in a few hours, and it wouldn't even be raining. So, you know, trying to manage a boat is quite a problem. But I actually got to see a jaguar twice, just sunbathing on the riverbank, because obviously there was no boats in the pandemic, and they felt safe enough to come out. And just that connection, that eyeball to eyeball. I mean, he so wasn't bothered by our existence. And to be able to be, he's not in a national park, he's not in a zoo, he's just doing his thing. And oh, that was a profound, deeply awe-inspiring moment. So it was worth it all for just that, actually.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, we only have about 2 minutes left. I did want you to say something about the work you do. I know that you've got all kinds of work that you label elemental in some way. And you've got the Mesa of Alchemy, which synthesizes the 4 elements, the Mesa and Gene Keys by Richard Rudd. Just tell us just briefly a little bit about that. So
What
that
I suppose I've done a huge, I mean, I've been walking a shamanic path since 92. I've kind of done it all, and I've had deep medicine journeys and gone in and done all the shadow work. But what I've really come back to is that the most fundamental thing that helps us most is our relationship with the 4 primary elements: air, earth, fire, and water. And that seems very simple, but they are deeply profound. And even after 30, 40 years, I still learn things about the interrelationship of those elements all the time. And where we are, we've just developed this profile so you can find out where your element balance is. So I'm using it to really get people to develop their inner resilience at the moment, because we need to be in our resilience, because things aren't going to get easier. They're going to get more complicated and more difficult, and there's going to be more breakdown as we make the breakthroughs that we need. We are in this evolutionary crisis, and we've got to start taking responsibility for ourselves again. We've given our power away too much to, it's like, oh, someone else will solve it. Someone else is going to sort the problem. No, we'll have to sort it. We're the ones we've been waiting for, as they say. And that's really what it means. It's what is your responsibility. And when we work with the elements and we really understand our nature and those balance and how we can use what we don't have, like we can, if we're lacking in air, we can do some breath work. If we're lacking in water, we can go and have a shower. Let's go by the seaside. It's very good to be able to find your balance and work with these in a profoundly creative way that really makes you strong in yourself, so you can just walk this life walk that you've turned up for with more ease and grace.
Good. I'm going to have to leave it there, Davina, I'm afraid. I want to thank you for adding your 10 best spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations. You can learn more about Davina's books, shamanic courses, workshops, retreats, and pilgrimages at naturalwisdom.co and Davina MacKail. That's MacKail.com. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you again to Davina MacKail.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Sandie.